Okay, so this video we're going to talk about the life, death, life nature of relationships, and more specifically, the death element of relationships, a much overlooked, very important part of relationship development and of falling in love. So in this society, we haven't really acknowledged, we've forgotten the life, death, life nature. And so especially in relationships, we are generally interested in the life portion, and then once the death portion shows up, we want to get out. And that's why we have so many turnovers in our relationships, because of this element. So this is why I want to talk about it. There's some awesome stories that help to illustrate what I'm talking about, namely the skeleton woman in the Women Who Run with the Wolves book, which is one of my favorites. So you can read there, and she breaks it down, but I really do want to talk about it in terms of alchemy, because I believe a union, the coming together of two individuals, is for the purpose of alchemy. So alchemy is generally thought of as the process of turning base metal into gold, right? But it's more than that also. It's not just that. It's also for turning base human emotions and aspects of consciousness into our golden consciousness, into our higher God consciousness, if you will. So people who are compatible to do this alchemy work, there will be an attraction. Okay, this is the initial pull for some sort of alchemical process to happen. And it's true that sometimes the alchemy is able to, elevate something in a person, and then the relationship is done. Like, that's all that happens. But not always. Sometimes it seems like that's the end when you get to a certain phase, like maybe you lose attraction, or maybe something comes up that triggers you, especially something you're afraid of, something you don't want. It triggers a sense of self-worth or lack of self-worth. And in that moment, that's actually the pivotal moment that the alchemy is occurring. Okay, so two people are bringing very different psychological elements that are childhood stories, that are life patterns, that are societal impressions. And the goal, right, is to return to the purified consciousness, the highest expression of our authenticity, right? That's why we're here. And we can really only get there through relationships. That's the kind of tricky and cool thing, and sometimes frustrating thing, when you know these principles and you find yourself just cusping into a relationship and the alchemy begins, and then the death nature comes in. She's there to guard the passageway, right? The initiation portal through the alchemical process of change, so that higher expression, higher presence in both parties, not just one, can be enacted. Now, if you don't wait out this process and you just get freaked out and run away, there will be some initiation that occurs. It's not all for naught. You'll learn something about yourself. But in order to break down the base elements that are holding us back, that are our patterns, we must endure the death process, the dissolve, that relationships enact. So this is the tricky part, because this is not what we're taught. So as soon as there's a sign of what we might call a red flag, or what the counterculture, I would like to say, is called a red flag. And this can include lots of terminologies, okay? And I'm going to bump into some friction from some of y'all on this. But labels like narcissism and gaslighting and all these sorts of things, abuse in some ways can also fall into the category of alchemy, but I maybe save some of those for a different talk, okay? And I am putting together a course on the alchemy of relationship. If you're interested in knowing more about this, watch for that. So in the story of Skeleton Woman, the fisherman comes upon the woman who, at the beginning of the story, her father throws her over a cliff and she dies at the bottom of the sea, and the fish eat her all up or whatever, and she's just bones and hair. And she's there, and all the fishermen have fished elsewhere, but in this story, long enough has passed that this unknown fisherman, he comes to this area and he pulls up thinking he's got a big catch, right? And this is how we go looking for love too. We go looking for the big catch. We want the catch. We want to have the big fish, you know, where we're like, I caught the perfect bite for myself. I caught the perfect partner. I caught the perfect, and even you want to show it off or take pictures and be like, look what I caught, right? So you go out on this hunt, but anytime you go hunting for love, Skeleton Woman is sure to find you and to choose you. And so what happens is you actually, in the story, the fisherman catches Skeleton Woman, and as he's happily reeling her in, suddenly he gets a glimpse of the bones, the raw truth, and maybe the wounded nature of both the other person and the self. The wound shows up. Quickly after the excitement of this big catch, whoa, I'm so excited, suddenly the wound is there. And that frightens many people, to see somebody beyond their initial, the initial fantasy actually that we have about the catch. Because we all imagine that we're going to catch this perfect person, they're going to have all the pieces, and it's just all going to be there and click. We don't really imagine that there's all these things that we will need to do and engage in order to traverse this and find the deeper love. And actually our psyche is the one who attracted the perfect person to do that work with us. So that's the sometimes frustrating thing when somebody cuts out, is often the other person's left feeling like, wow, you just activated the Skeleton Woman element and then like jump ship. So that's frustrating. I know a lot of women express that as a frustration at this time, and I think it's because the masculine's not as informed or doesn't know that much about this element, where the woman is more learned in the ways because of her moon cycle in the death and rebirth process, knowing that it's a crucial element for anything to deepen and become alive again. There must be a breaking down. So the breaking down part is the death process in this life, death, life. So whatever fantasy suddenly breaks down, what we need to understand as a people is that is the moment that great transformation is being enacted. That is the moment of the death process that is to be honored, revered, and maybe step back into, to notice.
I was just trying to bite.
Yeah, that's great. That's awesome. I'm just doing a little talk. Okay. Thank you, honey. Children are a great example of this, that our life process, when we become pregnant, we go through a death phase of the old personality falling away. And yet there's not really any way to get out of that process unless you terminate, right? But going forward, you're going to go through a death, and then you're going to have this new rebirth that is more substantial than ever was the beginning process or the previous you. So is true with relationship. If you've ever endured a death process in a relationship and you've let the whole thing go through that dissolve, you've let it die, you've like surrendered to that process, and then sometimes it's going to happen in a moment, right? As soon as you accept that that old structure has collapsed, and maybe it was even partially a fantasy, then some new element is born in both parties that is a higher octave than was previously, and is also more raw and more real. More is revealed. In the Skeleton Woman story, she follows him all the way into her hut. He's connected to the string of the fishing line, right? And when he gets in the hut and realizes he's face to face in his own home, in his own abode, when you come face to face with death, the wound again that is covering the real person, and you begin to be caring and curious and willing to kind of pick through, what is this trigger in me? What is this thing about you? What is this breaking away? Why do I feel this way? And you curiously will walk in closer In the story, Skeleton Woman then lulls the man into sleep. He falls asleep. He feels comfortable. He starts to feel relaxed, and he sheds a tear. Compassion and passion mix. Something is stirred in him. Something is awakening when we allow this curiosity to facing the other person's wounds, and we choose not to run away. We just stand in it. The bravery peels back the layers and reveals the next portion. And this is where the Skeleton Woman in the story finds the beating heart of the man as a drum, begins to sing with the beating heart herself, fleshing herself back out into the wild woman, the full-bodied woman, which, by the way, the man has yet to meet. When the man pulls up the line, first it's just a fantasy. He's only meeting his fantasy. And then when the real shows up, this is when he first retreats, because the fantasy must crumble and the real must appear. The real woman comes only after the curiosity, the insight, the willing to look at the wound. And then, when she fleshes out, the true nature is revealed. And love may then find itself in a deeper way that is not just the passion of fantasy or the carrying forward of the old ideas of relationship, but is instead based on the newness these two people are allowing to occur in the alchemy of their relating, their union. And of course, this can go on again and again in relationships. We can go through moments where we're just melting down again, and it seems like everything is crumbling and falling apart. But if both parties willingly stand in that and allow that process and don't get scared away and don't let the ego inflate and have to block that or project back their own hurts, if instead you can just stand together in it, then again, a new layer is revealed. And this is where love can deepen deeper and deeper and deeper between two people if Skeleton Woman process is honored. Now, of course, the alternative to this is there can be an abusive situation that looks like this. The only difference is the person's willing to look at themselves, to look at the other person, to see the wound, and to make a change, to make a transformation. If no change is happening, then there is no growth. And it's just a repeating cycle of abuse, okay? But if something comes up that's the wound, at that moment, it may feel like abuse. You may be getting yelled at. But if that turns then into a healing moment, a transformative moment that up-levels both, this is the life, death, life, nature playing itself out. This is the alchemy transforming, and it's meant to. It's meant to transform us if we let it. And that is the beauty and the power of relationship, and why it is the master path in yoga, along with pregnancy, some traditions say. Because it forces us to stand in the fire with our own discomfort and look at the wound and do it in the presence of another person. It's really, really powerful and causes us to need to set our ego aside and be willing to be vulnerable and be willing to expose ourselves and be willing to cry the tears in front of the other and not fear being judged, because that is the alchemy. That's the burning away. It's literally an alchemical process of burning away the old persona so that the next truest version can reveal itself. And it really is so very beautiful when two people go through this process together. One of the most beautiful things to experience and to witness. So, I hope this has given you a little taste into what more will be explored in the Alchemy of Relationship course coming up. So if you're interested, you can also send me an email at stasiabliss@gmail.com. Let me know you're interested in that course, and we'll get that to you when it's ready. I'll give you the link. Okay, thank you so much for joining me this day. Here's to love and to death in love as part of the ever-blooming depth of conscious union.